The galaxy had long since bent its knee to a single ruler. Worlds that had once flown their banners with pride now lowered them at the sight of his crest, a symbol etched in blood and fear across 1,000 star systems. The Galactic King was not merely a monarch, he was the embodiment of power, arrogance, and the certainty that no force in existence could challenge his reign. Entire species spoke his name in whispers, not because they revered him, but because they understood the consequences of even casual defiance. His empire was vast, his reach infinite, and his cruelty legendary. Those who resisted were not merely defeated, they were erased, their history reduced to footnotes in a scroll meant only to glorify his victories. In this sprawling dominion of submission and obedience, only one species had dared to resist beyond what the Empire expected, and their name had become synonymous with futility: humans. They had come from a planet the Empire had dismissed at first as another minor world of little consequence. Their biology was unusual, their environment harsh, but that was hardly unique in a galaxy teeming with life. The Empire had crushed civilizations far older and more advanced, so when humanity appeared on the stage, the king and his advisors viewed them as an insignificant nuisance. Yet they did not fold when fleets darkened their skies. They did not crumble when entire cities burned. Instead, they resisted in ways the Empire had not anticipated. They fought in space, yes, but they also fought on the ground, in forests, deserts, oceans, and ruins. They fought with warships, but also with sharpened metal, chemical fire, and bare hands when nothing else remained. They fought when there was nothing left to win, fought when surrender would have been the logical choice, fought in a way that unnerved even the Empire's hardened veterans. The Galactic King despised them for it. Every victory over humans came at a cost higher than expected, every conquered colony required constant suppression, every captured soldier stared with eyes that were unbroken despite chains. And that, more than anything, offended him. He believed fear to be the foundation of order. Entire species had folded beneath a mere demonstration of his wrath, yet humans seemed immune to the kind of terror that paralyzed others. Instead, they grew sharper, harder, more dangerous under the boot. It had taken years, longer than any other conquest in memory, but eventually, the human fleets were shattered, their colonies scoured, their armies annihilated. Earth itself lay broken beneath the Empire's heel. To the king, this was not simply victory, it was a personal triumph, the extinguishing of an irritant that had mocked him with defiance for too long. The announcement was made galaxy-wide. Humanity was finished. Their warriors had been taken alive, not out of mercy, but to demonstrate the futility of opposing him. There was to be a grand display, a spectacle broadcast across every major system, where the last of humanity's soldiers would be paraded as prisoners. The king intended it as the final nail in the coffin, proof not only of conquest but of absolute dominance. The galaxy was to see what happened to those who resisted, and in their humiliation, the king sought to erase any spark of rebellion from the minds of others. When the day arrived, the capital world was transformed into a theater of obedience. Vast banners of the royal crest hung from spires that stretched into the clouds. Streets were lined with citizens drawn from dozens of species, their voices raised in a chorus of enforced celebration. Military processions marched with mechanical precision, war machines rumbled down avenues, and at the center of it all was the massive court plaza, a structure designed to broadcast both grandeur and fear. The king sat upon his elevated throne, adorned with jewels mined from conquered worlds, his robe heavy with the weight of stolen wealth. His gaze was sharp and cold, surveying the crowd like a predator eyeing prey. The humans were brought forward in chains. They were gaunt, marked with scars from battles and imprisonment, yet they walked with a posture that defied the image of broken slaves. The guards shoved them roughly, trying to force them to stumble for the amusement of the crowd, but the humans steadied themselves, moving with an eerie synchronization that unsettled even their captors. Their eyes did not dart nervously like those of other conquered species. They did not beg, they did not cry, they did not lower their gaze. Instead, they fixed their stare forward, silent and unyielding. The citizens cheered. They hurled insults in dozens of tongues, laughed at the sight of shackled deathworlders who had once dared to think themselves equal to the Empire. They saw frail bodies, emaciated by starvation, bruised from captivity, and assumed this was proof of the king's triumph. But beneath the jeers, there was unease. Those eyes, steady, cold, alive, did not belong to defeated creatures. They belonged to predators watching, waiting. Few noticed. Fewer cared. The king noticed, but his arrogance twisted the observation into mockery. He rose from his throne, the plaza falling into silence at the motion. His voice, amplified by the court's technology, thundered across the space and into the countless systems tuned to the broadcast. He spoke of conquest, of the Empire's supremacy, of how the galaxy thrived because he alone was strong enough to crush opposition. He pointed to the humans as living proof that even the most defiant could be broken. He spoke of their fragility, their mortality, their smallness in the vastness of the stars. Each word was calculated to diminish them, to reduce them from the fierce warriors they had been to pitiful examples of futility. The crowd roared its approval, drowning out reason with blind loyalty, but words were not enough. The king was a master of theater, and humiliation was his favorite tool. He descended from his throne, each step echoing through the plaza, a deliberate reminder that even in his vulnerability, he was untouchable. Guards parted before him as he strode toward the line of prisoners. The humans stood as they had before, chained, silent, eyes unyielding. He stopped before one of them, a soldier whose face bore the hardened lines of countless battles, whose body was battered but whose posture was unwavering. The king studied him, smirked, and raised his hand. The sound of the slap reverberated across the plaza. The king's jeweled hand struck the soldier's face with deliberate force, a gesture meant not to wound but to humiliate. The crowd erupted in laughter, their voices echoing through the grand court and across the networks transmitting the spectacle. Alien citizens laughed at the sight of the so-called deathworlders reduced to nothing more than playthings for their ruler's amusement. They jeered, clapped, and mocked, taking joy in the cruelty as though it were entertainment. The soldier's head had turned with the impact, but slowly, deliberately, he straightened again. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, yet his eyes never left the king's. There was no fear there, no plea for mercy. There was only something that no one in the crowd could name, something that pricked at the edges of instinct and stirred unease. The king laughed, mistaking silence for submission, mistaking stillness for defeat. He turned to the crowd, raising his arms as though expecting their cheers to drown the moment, and indeed they did. Billions across the galaxy laughed at the image of a human slapped into compliance, but beneath the laughter, those who looked closely saw what the king did not. They saw the tension in the human's posture, the quiet unity in their stance, the fire smoldering in their gaze. They saw a storm contained, not extinguished. They saw silence that was not submission, but patience. And though the king basked in his triumph, though the crowd roared in amusement, though the galaxy believed it had witnessed the humiliation of humanity, something far greater had been set into motion, for the slap was not the end. It was the beginning. The Empire returned from the council chamber in fury, but also in arrogance. To them, the humans had sealed their fate. They had refused peace and now would be annihilated for it. The Emperor's advisors assured him that Earth could not stand against the might of 1,000 systems. Humanity had no allies, no ancient fleets, no vast storehouses of resources. They were a young species, reckless and unrefined. To the Empire, this war would be nothing more than another demonstration of supremacy, a lesson to remind the galaxy that defiance was futile. Already the propaganda machines churned out declarations of inevitable victory, and imperial fleets began to mobilize with confidence bordering on complacency. They expected a short campaign, another rebellion to be crushed. They had not understood what they had awakened on Earth. The declaration of war was received not with fear, but with grim unity. The generals had spoken for all humanity, and their words ignited a fire across every colony and settlement. Industries that had once built homes and vehicles now shifted overnight into producing warships, weapons, and supplies. Civilian freighters were refitted into carriers, mining stations retooled into shipyards, and every man and woman capable of serving stepped forward. Humanity had never been as numerous as the galactic powers, but they had something the Empire could not comprehend, a refusal to break and an instinct for survival born from their harsh homeworld. On Earth, history was one of endless struggle against nature, against one another, against extinction itself. Where other species spoke of avoiding war at all costs, humanity had lived with it as a constant. To them, war was not foreign, it was a language they had mastered. The Empire's first fleets advanced quickly, sweeping toward human colonies with overwhelming firepower. Their ships were vast and bristling with weapons, designed to intimidate lesser species into surrender before a single shot was fired. Against most foes, it worked. Against humans, it did not. The first Imperial fleet to enter human space met resistance that defied expectation. They found themselves ambushed not in open battles, but in asteroid fields, nebulae, and supply routes. Human ships, smaller and seemingly inferior, struck with precision and disappeared before counterfire could land. The Empire called it cowardice, dishonor, a refusal to face battle directly. The humans called it strategy. Every convoy burned. Every isolated detachment was torn apart. For every ship humanity lost, 3 Imperial ships were reduced to wreckage. The Empire had prepared for an army that would fight conventionally. What they faced instead was a predator striking at their throat. What unsettled the Empire most was not the attacks themselves, but the ferocity behind them. Human soldiers boarded ships with a brutality that shocked their opponents. Where Imperial troops fought for glory and conquest, humans fought for vengeance. They did not retreat, they did not negotiate, they did not hesitate. They fought with the fury of those who had nothing left to lose, and that fury carved through the Empire's ranks like fire through dry grass. Imperial commanders reported soldiers breaking under the strain, terrified not of human weapons, but of human determination. The phrase that had been spoken in the council chamber spread across battlefields as a whisper among Imperial troops: "You killed their women." It became the explanation for every suicidal charge, every unyielding defense, every act of terrifying resolve. It became the legend that followed humanity into every battle. The Empire, insulted by these early losses, escalated. They sent larger fleets, entire armadas, expecting numbers to crush defiance. But humanity adapted faster than any species they had faced. They learned from every battle, altered tactics, rewrote strategies, and exploited weaknesses. Where Imperial fleets slumbered in rigid formations, humanity moved with fluid unpredictability. Where the Empire relied on overwhelming firepower, humans used speed, misdirection, and deception. They turned their small size into advantage, slipping past blockades, striking at fuel depots, and vanishing into the dark. The Empire soon realized that for every system they tried to hold, 2 more fell into chaos as human strikes severed their lifelines. A war of territory had become a war of endurance, and endurance was humanity's strength, but the true terror was not their tactics. It was their will. The Empire had expected humans to surrender once the cost grew too high. Instead, losses only hardened them. Each fallen colony, each destroyed ship, each lost family member only deepened their resolve. They did not fracture under the weight of war, they unified. The more the Empire struck, the stronger humanity became. Entire generations who had never seen Earth now fought with the same ferocity as those who had been born under its skies. It was not patriotism, not pride, not even survival. It was vengeance, pure and simple, and vengeance has no limits. The psychological war was as devastating as the physical one. Human fleets broadcast messages into Imperial space, not threats, but reminders. They sent recordings of massacres the Empire had committed, images of burned villages, cries of the dying. They reminded soldiers of the women and children slaughtered, forcing them to confront the atrocities they had been ordered to commit. And then the human voice would come, steady and unrelenting: "You killed our women. Now we come for you." For Imperial soldiers, it was worse than propaganda. It was the knowledge that they were fighting an enemy who would never forgive, never stop, and never show mercy. Morale faltered. Desertions grew. Entire garrisons abandoned posts rather than face human vengeance. The Empire punished them harshly, But fear was a plague they could not cure. As months passed, the tide of war shifted further. Human victories were not grand, glorious battles that could be displayed in history books. They were calculated, surgical, and merciless. A fuel depot destroyed here, a communications hub severed there, until whole fleets starved without supplies. A factory world left burning, its output silenced, crippling production across half a sector. The Empire's strength lay in its size, but size had become a weakness. Every vast supply line was a vein waiting to be cut, and humanity cut them all. What the Empire had seen as an unstoppable war machine was revealed to be fragile, bloated, and unprepared for an enemy that would not fight by their rules. The Council watched in shock. They had expected humanity to be crushed, their defiance extinguished in weeks. Instead, they saw the impossible unfolding, a species with fewer numbers, smaller fleets, and no allies slowly dismantling the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Whispers spread of ancient prophecies, of death worlders who would rise and shatter the order of the stars. Species who had once mocked humanity now watched with fear, wondering if they were witnessing the birth of something even greater than the Empire itself. Still, the Empire refused to concede. Pride drove them, the belief that they could not be beaten by what they considered a lesser race. They escalated again, sending fleets so vast that they blotted out suns. Yet even then, victory eluded them. Humanity did not face them head-on. They refused to give the Empire the satisfaction. They struck at the edges, bled them dry, and left them chasing shadows. To the Empire, it was infuriating. To the humans, it was method. Every delay, every skirmish, every sacrifice was calculated to erode the Empire's strength. Humanity had set the terms of war, and the Empire was too arrogant to realize it. The galaxy began to understand the truth. Humanity was not fighting for survival. They were not fighting to defend borders or to preserve resources. They were fighting because of a wound that could never heal, a crime that demanded blood. This was not a political war, not a war of empires. It was personal. Every human carried the memory of those who had been slaughtered. Every soldier fought as if carrying the weight of every lost mother, sister, and daughter. And because of that, there was no negotiation, no compromise, no surrender. The Empire had given them nothing left to lose. In doing so, they had created the most dangerous enemy imaginable. By the end of the second year of war, the Empire had lost more ships than in centuries of conquest. Their resources bled away, their soldiers demoralized, their citizens restless under the strain. Yet humanity only grew more resolute. The generals who had once stood in the council chamber, silent and cold, now commanded fleets that struck terror into the galaxy. Their strategy was no longer questioned. Their leadership was absolute. They did not promise victory to their people, they promised justice. And their people followed them without hesitation. The Empire had believed they would win because they had always won. Humanity had believed they must win because the alternative was unthinkable. That was the difference. And it was a difference the galaxy would never forget.